I'm currently working on research and producing several short videos about Dr. Carrie Best for the Black Loyalist Society in Birchtown, Nova Scotia. The Heritage Centre there is doing a lot of work about Black Loyalist history, and each year they try to commemorate a trailblazer, and so Carrie Best is the person that I'm working on. And so I'm producing these short pieces that will be shown in the centre, used for educational purposes. I knew Dr. Carrie Best from the time I was young. When I was young, we would go to the New Glasgow Baptist Church and saw her there. And then in later years, of course, would see her, hear her strong voice. And she was one of those individuals that if she beckoned you, you went, because she had something to say. She might want you to help her with something, but she always was a very commanding presence. And so I knew her, I really admired what she did. And as a journalist, when I first started, she was one of the people that I knew about. So I knew that I wasn't the first person to try to do work in journalism, because Carrie Best was there. And even before Carrie Best, there was a newspaper called The Atlantic Advocate that was published by Black Nova Scotians at the turn of the century in the early 1900s. And so the Atlantic Advocate, then Carrie Best as a trailblazing journalist. So I had those in my background, as you might say, that I knew that there were people who had done that kind of work before I started. Carrie Best began her own newspaper in the 1940s, and it began as a small 8.5 by 11 broadsheet. She decided she wanted to write, she wanted to uncover stories that weren't being covered in the mainstream media. She was a very fierce champion for human rights and justice. She did not like injustice and decided she wanted to write about stories that no one else was covering. And so that's what she did. She covered stories related to Indigenous people in Nova Scotia, covered stories about the experiences of people from the Black community in Nova Scotia, and her newspaper actually went across the country. Carrie Best was a very brave and courageous woman, but she was also someone who loved poetry and loved writing. Her radio program called The Quiet Corner was one that was listened to by people throughout the Maritimes. And on that program, she would recite poetry that she had memorized from when she was a child. And then she would read the poetry, and she also played classical music. And that program was listened to by many people throughout the Maritimes. And so it's also wonderful for me as a poet to also know that I shared a love of writing and poetry with Dr. Carrie Best.